a moment and you're sitting watching the television
Right.
on that night,
Yes.
and you say you'd be a damn good president and you thought you were going to win. Just talk us through the next few minutes.
Well, I was shocked and very disappointed, obviously. Yes, I did think I was going to win. So did nearly everybody else. And it began early in the evening when a couple of early states came in that we thought we would do better in than we did. But it didn't end.
A sinking feeling at that point.
Yes, it was a sinking feeling. It was a sick feeling. By midnight, we knew that I was going to lose the Electoral College by a very, very narrow margin, and I went on to win the popular vote, but in our system that didn't matter.
Because it's not just that you lost to a sophisticated, well-organized traditional Republican. You lost to a television game show man who had nevertheless found a way to get to the White House that you had not spotted.
That's a very good summary, yes. A reality TV star. Everything was, really part of his effort to make it entertaining, to give people reasons to channel their anger, their grievance toward others, and then to find in him someone that they could relate to and vote for.
And this is a man you really, really didn't like. There's a very powerful part in the book where you're on stage on television with him and he's prowling around behind you and you nearly turn around and call him a creep. Would things have been different if you had done?
I don't know the answer to that. I believed that keeping your calm, being composed is part of the job of being president. What turned out to be an entertainment contest, and he was quite good at that, maybe should have engendered a different response from me. But
it was a game you hadn't played before.
It was a game I hadn't played. It was a game that I didn't think presidents should play. It was a game that I wasn't sure I would be advantaged by, because as I was thinking on the stage that night, I knew that I had prepared for that debate and that he would be disruptive and difficult. And I had concluded in the preparation that the best thing for me to do was just to, not get sucked into it. But maybe there would have been a moment of confrontation that might have worked to my advantage.
And you use the word prepared there, and that may be part of the problem, because you're very tough on yourself in parts of this book. You say all the mistakes you think you made, but the toughest thing I think you say is that people just didn't like me. And I wonder why you think that was.
Because I think there was a very concerted, and it turned out to be quite effective campaign to tear me down.
But also, the kind of politics that you were part of, all the triangulation, the very careful messaging, that produced a kind of political rhetoric that by this election people found inauthentic. They just didn't get the emotional charge.
You know what? That's a really fair point. But I think we're at a point in politics, maybe it's true here as it is in our country, where being thoughtful is viewed as somehow inauthentic. If you're taking your time formulating an answer to a very difficult question, and you've prepared, you have a lot of thoughts about it, that's not as immediately satisfying as just, coming out with some kind of rhetorical blast. So I thought it was odd that my experience was somehow not considered sufficient in the new world in which we find ourselves, and that in a reality TV campaign, you get much more points if you're fast and quick and a little bit on the attack and insulting, because people say, oh, that's real. Well, it's not anymore real, but it does come across that way.
But perhaps it works in a context where people feel really angry already. And average incomes for middle-class Americans had fallen since your husband was president, and really for a very, very long time. And you were seen, as you say in the book as well, as being part of the elite, too close to the bankers, too close to the very same people who had carried on doing well while so many Americans had a really tough time.
Over the years, the kind of sense of anger, resentment, grievance, whatever one wants to call it, had been building up, because I think it's a crisis in Western democracy, not just in the United States. And I'm not sure that I was as forceful and clear in what I was going to do, but I had a record, I had programs, people knew what I would be doing as president, but it wasn't as dramatic as maybe it needed to be.
And they don't read the economic textbooks, and
No.
they don't read the fine detail,
That's right.
and they look at television and they see you as part of a kind of charmed golden circle of people at the top. And there's a very telling moment in the book when you're in the Caribbean at Oscar de la Renta's place when you decide to run.
Yeah.
And that in itself, in a sense, epitomizes the problem, doesn't it?
Well, it epitomizes the problem if you are going to have a very narrow view of what the problem is. And I put that in deliberately, you know, because he was a dear friend of mine, and he was an immigration success story. Someone who worked his way up in our country to great acclaim because of hard work and because of what he produced. And we now have a president who wants to disregard the enormous contributions that immigrants have been and are making to America's future.
Well, you raise the question of the president. The most formidable chapter in the book, if I may say so, is on Russia. Very, very detailed. And I'm going to come on to Russia in more detail in a moment. But in that chapter, you say this about Donald Trump. He doesn't just like Putin, he wants to be like Putin, a white, authoritarian leader who would put down dissenters, repress minorities, disenfranchise voters, weaken the press, and amass untold billions for himself. He dreams of Moscow on the Potomac. That sounds like a proto-fascist.
Well, I'm not going to label it. I described it in the book, and you accurately read what I said. And in the last few weeks, we've seen examples of what I worried about. He made a statement the other day saying that NBC, one of our big broadcast TV networks, should have their license questioned because he doesn't like the stories that they produce about him.
So you think on the press, on the media, he's going beyond angry tweets to actually challenging the fabric of American media itself?
I think he wants to. That's why I said he wants to be like an authoritarian. He wants to. So far, he has been checked and balanced under our Constitution to a limited extent by the Congress and by the court system. So I think that the fabric is certainly being stretched.
Okay, let's talk about Russia, because as I say, it's a very interesting part of your book. And for people who don't know all the detail, it's a very complicated and detailed story. Can you just explain what the Russians did during the campaign, in your view?
Well, the Russians wanted to help Trump and hurt me. In their wildest dreams, they wanted to elect him and defeat me.
Why was that?
Well, I think for several reasons. Our intelligence community says that Putin had a personal grudge against me, in part because as Secretary of State, I spoke out about human rights abuses, illegitimate election activities within Russia. He wants to undermine NATO, the EU, American stability, and he has a lot of practice from Soviet days to the present in doing propaganda, having content organizations, they're called content farms in places like Macedonia, pumping out fake news, having Russians posing as Americans, and not just to denigrate me, which was a big part of what they did, but to sow distrust and division.
What's not clear from your book is whether you think that the Trump campaign was colluding in this.
We don't know the answer to that. That is part of what is being explored. There are some serious questions, because what happened when the emails of my campaign manager, John Podesta, were stolen by the Russian intelligence services. Then they were conveyed to WikiLeaks, which is basically now a mouthpiece for Russia authoritarianism. And then they were released on the very same day that the Hollywood Access tape came out showing Trump bragging about sexual assault. Then they were what we call weaponized, so that they were turned into phony news stories, they were turned into Facebook posts, and then they were targeted at specific voters. The question is, where did the Russians get that kind of targeting information? And that is one of the unanswered questions that investigators in Congress and the special counsel are looking into.
This is a pattern that we're seeing in Europe as well, of course.
Yes.
The Germans have been very worried about Russian involvement in their elections. President Macron in France has talked about it as well, and there have been suggestions that it's over here too. What should Britain be looking for, and how should we protect ourselves?
I think Britain has a lot at stake in this, and I think this is affecting all of Western democracies. So part of what has to happen is cracking down on foreign interference in your election. And anyone who makes common cause with Russia, China, Iran, whoever it might be, right now it's Russia because they're the ones trying to destabilize Europe, should be held accountable, civilly and criminally, in my opinion.
This week in Britain, we're right on the edge of suddenly talking about no deal when we leave the EU. What would no deal mean for Britain in your view?
I think it would be a very big disadvantage to Britain. I mean, no deal meaning no preferential trade deals, which means products in Britain would not have the kind of easy access to the European market that you've had under EU membership. It could very well mean that there would be more pressure on businesses in Britain, if not to leave completely, at least to also have sites and employment elsewhere in Europe. I think that the disruption for Britain could be, quite serious.
A lot of people on the other side of the argument here, on the pro-Brexit side, look to America and they see that is our future. A new great big trade deal with Donald Trump is the way forward for Britain.
Well, yes, but you're making a trade deal with someone who says he doesn't believe in trade. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out over the next few years. But I wanted to make another point about Brexit. Looking at the Brexit vote now, it was a precursor to some extent of what happened to us in the United States. But the amount of fabricated, false information that your voters were given by the Leave campaign.
Say, yeah.
Well, I'm not as familiar with, but I'm very familiar with what the Leave side said because they transported a lot of that on behalf of Trump. You had, Farage campaigning for Trump and the like. The big lie is a very potent tool, and we've somewhat kept it at bay in Western democracies, partly because of the freedom of the press. But given the absolutely explosive spread of online news and sites that have sprung up that are very effective at propagating false stories, we've got some thinking to do about how we're going to, not to say, you have to agree with me, that's not what I'm saying at all, but there has to be some basic level of fact and evidence in our politics, well, frankly, in all parts of our society.
Now, the other big story of this week, as you know, is your friend Harvey Weinstein, who has had a huge slew of really serious allegations made against him. What was your reaction when you first read those allegations?
I was shocked and appalled because I've known him through politics, as many Democrats have. He's been a supporter.
Yeah.
He's been a funder, and for all of us, for Obama, for me, for people who have run for office in the United States. So it was just disgusting, and the stories that have come out are heartbreaking. And I really commend the women who have been willing to step forward now and tell their stories. But I think it's important that we not just focus on him and whatever consequences flow from the stories about his behavior, but that we recognize this kind of behavior cannot be tolerated anywhere, whether it's in entertainment, politics. After all, we have someone admitting to being a sexual assaulter in the Oval Office. There has to be a recognition that we must stand against this kind of action that is so sexist and misogynistic.
And this depends upon women coming forward and having the courage to come forward.
Right.
And yet in your book, the three women brought onto stage by Trump attacking your husband, and you kind of dismissed them. Was that the right thing to do? Are you sure about that?
Well, yes, because that had all been litigated. I mean, that was the subject of a huge, investigation, as you might recall, in the late 90s, and there were conclusions drawn, and that was clearly in the past. But it is something that has to be taken seriously. As I say, for everyone, not just for those in entertainment right now.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to blame women for what men do, but nonetheless, powerful women like you also have a duty to call men out.
As I did throughout the campaign.
Yeah.
I certainly did. I mean, the really sad part of the campaign was how this horrific tape, what he said about women in the past, what he said about women during the campaign, was discounted by a lot of voters. I think he has a very narrow view of what a woman should be and is very focused on keeping women in their place. And so the way he treated Angela Merkel, for example, when she came to the Oval Office, where he would not shake her hand, where he would not look at her, compared with the way he treated Theresa May, whose hand he grabbed.
It was a grab, wasn't it?
Yes, yes. I mean, so there's two kind of women. Women that I like and I can work with, and women that I'm afraid of or that would challenge me. I mean, that seems quite, sexist, if not misogynistic to me.
Now, Hillary Clinton is not going to run for the American presidency again, I suspect.
That's right.
But you have said very clearly in your book you intend to live long enough to see the first female president of the United States. Can I just throw a few names at you?
Sure.
Oprah Winfrey. Might seem odd, but,
Yeah. Well, she has
star.
said she's not interested, so I'm only going to look at people who might run.
Okay, she has tweeted articles suggesting that she might run.
Well, it's very flattering, So who knows? Maybe
Okay.
in 2 years she will. You never know.
Okay. What about Michelle Obama?
She has said absolutely she's never going to run for political office.
All right. What about somebody who appears a lot in your book and clearly seems to be more qualified than almost anybody else, Chelsea Clinton?
No, she's never been at all interested in running for office. She might, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Who knows what life brings, but not in any way that I see right now.
Okay. Last thought. Ivanka Trump.
Well, I don't know her, so I really can't speculate at all on that. Who knows? I mean, it's hard to predict these days what will happen in American politics.